5 thugs attacked an elderly black woman with a disability in a diner. They were paralyzed when her son, the porcelain plate shattered on the floor inches from the wheelchair, scattering scrambled eggs and hot coffee over Dorothy's shoes. Laughter immediately erupted. "Oops, my hand slipped," said Tyler, with a smile that made it clear that nothing had been accidental. His 4 friends burst into hysterical laughter, slapping the tables as if this were the height of comedy. It was 9:45 a.m. on a typical Thursday morning at Miller's Diner in the heart of a Texas town, where everyone knew everyone else. And 5 boys in their early 20s had decided to turn a 72-year-old woman's breakfast into their personal entertainment. Dorothy Patterson didn't move. She just looked at the mess at her feet with an expression that anyone paying attention would recognize. It wasn't surprise, it was confirmation, as if this were just more proof of something she had suspected for a long time. "Are you okay, Grandma?" Brad, the second oldest of the group, teased, approaching her with exaggerated steps. "Want me to help you clean up this mess?"
"Oh wait, you can't even bend over, can you?"
Dorothy had been coming to Miller's Diner 3 times a week for the past 40 years. She knew every crack in the form counter, every stain on the ceiling, every creak in the front door. She had worked at that same establishment as a waitress for 2 decades, before a stroke at age 68 left her left side partially paralyzed and forced her into early retirement. Now she survived on a meager pension and memories of a time when she could carry 6 plates at once without spilling a drop. "Hey guys, did you see that? She's wearing those old lady compression stockings," Connor pointed out, lifting the hem of Dorothy's pants with his foot. "Man, that's disgusting." The diner was moderately busy. About 15 people were scattered among the tables and counter stools. Everyone saw it. Everyone heard it. No one did anything. Some looked away uncomfortably. Others pretended to be absorbed in their cell phones. The waitress, a young woman no more than 19, hesitated with a coffee pot in her hands. But when Tyler glanced in her direction, she hurried back behind the counter. That was the problem with small towns. Everyone knew who those boys were. Tyler and Brad were the sons of wealthy local farmers. Connor worked at his father's car dealership. Jake and Ryan were known for their wild parties and a history of minor offenses that never resulted in anything more serious than a casual chat with the sheriff, who happened to play poker every Saturday with their parents. "Honestly, I don't understand why people like that don't just stay home," Jake joined the group, now all surrounding Dorothy's table like hyenas around wounded prey. "I mean, no one wants to see that while they're eating." Dorothy finally looked up. Her fingers, the only ones that still responded perfectly to her brain's commands, moved slowly toward the old purse hanging on the side of her chair. But it wasn't to get tissues or money to pay the bill and leave quietly. As they probably expected, it was to get her cell phone. Something changed in her expression at that moment. A flash of memory crossed her face. 3 weeks ago in the same diner, when Tyler accidentally pushed her chair as he passed by. 2 weeks ago, when Brad made comments about that old medicine smell loud enough for her to hear. A week ago, when Connor filmed her trying to reach for the sugar and posted it on his stories with a caption, "Poor thing can't even pick things up by herself," followed by laughing emojis. She had kept it all. Every word, every look, every incident. Because Dorothy Patterson wasn't just an old lady that arrogant small-town boys could torment with impunity. She was a woman who had raised a son alone after her husband died in a work accident. A son she taught to never accept injustice, to always defend those who cannot defend themselves, and who grew up to become exactly the kind of person that parents like Tyler, Brad, Connor, Jake, and Ryan prayed their spoiled children would never cross paths with. "Who are you calling, Grandma?" Ryan snatched the phone from her hand with a sharp movement. "Are you going to call the police? My uncle is the sheriff, you old." The call was already in progress on speakerphone, and on the other end of the line, a deep, controlled voice echoed through the diner. "Mom, what is it?" Ryan stared at the phone in his hands as if he were holding an activated grenade. "James," Dorothy's voice came out shaky, but there was something in it that made silence fall over the diner like a shroud. "Those boys again. They broke my plate. They dirted my clothes. They're surrounding me." The silence on the other end lasted only 2 seconds, but they were 2 seconds that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. "Mom, are you still at Miller's?" "Yes, don't leave, don't move. I'll be there in 10 minutes, the call ended." Ryan handed the phone back to Dorothy with an awkward movement. Suddenly much less confident, Tyler forced a nervous laugh. "Oh, how scary, Grandma's son is coming. What's he going to do, man? Complain to our parents?" He tried to keep his tone mocking, but there was a noticeable crack in his voice. What none of them knew, because they were too young, too arrogant, and too stupid to pay attention to anything beyond their own bubbles of privilege, was who exactly James Patterson was. But in the next few minutes, As Dorothy sat in absolute silence with a slight smile on her lips for the first time that morning,
They would find out, and when they did, it would be too late.
there was something unsettling about Dorothy's calmness now, as if the last 15 minutes of humiliation had been merely the prelude to something much greater, something she had been patiently nurturing, waiting for the right moment. The boys began to exchange uncomfortable glances, sensing for the first time that they might have crossed an invisible line. Outside, the distant sound of a powerful engine began to grow louder. It wasn't the usual noise of Texas traffic. It was something heavier, more deliberate, something that made the glasses on the tables vibrate slightly. And Dorothy just waited, her hands now folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the diner's entrance door, as if awaiting the arrival of a storm she herself had summoned. If you're enjoying this story and want to find out what happens when this lady's son finally arrives, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The black Dodge Charger pulled up in front of Miller's diner with a precision that made the window panes vibrate. It wasn't the kind of car you often saw in that part of Texas, at least not driven by someone from that neighborhood. James Patterson was 38 years old and looked like he had been carved from granite. When he got out of the vehicle, his physical presence commanded immediate attention. 6'3" of pure compact muscle, shaved head, arms covered in tattoos that told stories most people would never live. But the most disturbing thing wasn't his intimidating appearance. It was the absolute control in every movement. The economy of gestures of someone trained to act, not react. Tyler was the first to see him through the window. "Man, look at the size of that guy." James entered the diner as if he were executing a tactical operation. His eyes scanned the room in 2 seconds. He identified every exit, counted how many people were present, located security cameras, and finally rested his gaze on the 5 boys still huddled around his mother's table. "Mom." His voice was surprisingly soft as he knelt beside Dorothy's chair, examining the coffee spilled on her clothes, the shards of porcelain on the floor. "Are you hurt?" "No, son, I'm fine now that you're here." Dorothy placed her trembling hand on his face, and for a moment, James's expression softened completely. It was the same tenderness he had known as a child when she worked 2 jobs to put food on the table. He rose slowly, turning to face the 5 boys. "Would someone please explain to me what's going on here?" Tyler, still betting on his usual bravado, stepped forward. "Look, man, it was just a joke, you know? Your mom's making a mountain out of a molehill joke."
James repeated the word as if testing its flavor.
"Breaking a 72-year-old woman's plate in a wheelchair is a joke? Oh, relax, bro. My dad owns the biggest farm in the area. We can pay for the plate." Brad tried the financial condescension route.
As if money could solve humiliation, James didn't move.
But something changed in his posture. It was like watching a predator deciding whether its prey was worth the effort of the hunt. "Your names, all of them. Sorry, but who the hell do you think you are to?" Connor began. But the sentence died in his throat when James took a single step toward him. "My name is James Patterson, Navy SEAL, 10 years of active duty. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. I currently work as a tactical instructor for Special Forces, and on weekends I take care of my mother." He paused significantly. "Now your names, I won't ask again." The silence in the diner was deafening. Even the waitress had stopped pretending to clean the counter. "Navy SEAL," the 2 words hung in the air like a sentence. "Tyler Morrison," the leader finally muttered, all his arrogance evaporating. The others quickly followed. Brad Hansen, Connor Wright, Jake Davidson, Ryan Mitchell. James took his cell phone out of his pocket. Not to make a call, but to take notes. Last names too, addresses, parents' names, man. "This is harassment," Jake tried to protest. "Harassment is what you did to my mother." James's voice remained calm, but there was a weight to it that made Jake instinctively back away. "I have witnesses, security cameras, and most importantly, I have my mother telling me this isn't the first time. So you can cooperate now, or I can make this official. Your choice." It was Ryan, always the most nervous of the group, who broke first. He began rattling off information as if confessing sins. The others followed, realizing that resistance would be worse, while James methodically wrote down every detail. Dorothy watched with an expression that mixed pride and sadness. She remembered when James was 7 and came home from school with a black eye after defending a smaller classmate who was being bullied. He had always been like that, unable to ignore injustice, programmed to protect the defenseless. That was exactly why she wasn't surprised when at 18 he announced he was enlisting in the Navy. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Son," she had said that night, holding his hands, calloused from working so hard to help her pay the bills after his father died. "It's not about proving, Mom. It's about serving. Like you've always served all of us. Now, 20 years later, he was still serving, only this time it was personal, okay?" James put his phone away but didn't move. "Now let's get a few things straight. First, you're going to pay not just for the plate, but for my mother's entire meal and for cleaning her clothes. Okay, no problem. Tyler tried to agree quickly. Eager to end this, I'm not done yet. The interruption was sharp. Second, you're going to apologize. Really apologize. Not those empty, sorry anti-apologies, but a genuine request for forgiveness while looking her in the eye. The discomfort was palpable. Apologizing meant admitting fault, and admitting fault meant lowering themselves to the level of someone they had spent the entire morning dehumanizing. And third, James crossed his arms, I'm going to visit each of your parents personally. I'm sure they'll love to hear how their children treat defenseless elderly people in public establishments. You can't do that, Brad finally found the courage to protest. My father will sue you for why? For reporting a crime? James tilted his head. Because that's what you committed. Article 47 of the Texas Penal Code, elder abuse. You could get up to 10 years in prison for that. Do you really want me to turn this into a police case? The threat hung in the air. 10 years suddenly. The joke didn't seem so funny. Dorothy watched silently, but inside a warm satisfaction began to spread. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about finally, after 3 weeks of enduring escalating taunts, seeing those privileged boys realize that actions have consequences. She had raised James alone after her husband died in a construction accident when the boy was only 5. She had worked as a waitress at that same diner for 20 years, saving every penny to give Herson a better chance, and he hadn't disappointed her. He had become everything she had dreamed of and more. You can start, James gestured to Dorothy. She's waiting. Tyler was the first approaching with hesitant steps. Mrs. Patterson, I'm sorry for what we did. It was wrong, very wrong. The words sounded mechanical, rehearsed. Dorothy just stared at him, not responding, one by one. The others repeated similar variations of forced apologies. When Ryan, the last one, finished, Dorothy finally spoke. Do you think I don't know who you are? Do you think an old lady in a wheelchair is invisible? Her voice, though physically weak, carried decades of dignity. I worked in this diner when your parents were just kids. I've seen this town grow. I've seen good people and bad people. And you're the kind of people who have everything. And appreciate nothing, Jake lowered his eyes. Genuinely ashamed for the first time. The others just waited for the moment to escape from this humiliating situation. James put his hand on Dorothy's shoulder. Mom, let's go home. I'll take care of the rest. As he helped Dorothy to her feet, he turned to the 5 boys one last time. You have 24 hours, tomorrow, at this time. I'll be knocking on each of your parents' doors. I suggest you use this time to decide whether you'd rather tell the story from your perspective or wait for me to tell it from mine. The threat was not empty. They knew it. Everyone in the diner knew it. As James carefully wheeled Dorothy's chair through the door, she looked back one last time. The 5 boys seemed to have shrunk, not physically, but existentially, as if the very reality of their actions had finally penetrated their bubbles of privilege. Outside, as James adjusted the chair in the adapted car he had bought for her 2 years ago, Dorothy held his hand. You didn't have to do that. Son, of course I did, Mom. You taught me that to remain silent in the face of injustice is to be complicit in it. In the back seat, Dorothy's purse lay open. Inside, carefully organized in a plastic folder, were 3 weeks of meticulous documentation. Time-stamped photos of each incident, audio recordings she had discreetly made with her cell phone, even written testimonies from other regular diner customers who'd witnessed the abuse, but never intervened. Dorothy Patterson was not just a passive victim. She was a woman who had learned over 7 decades of living as a black woman in the southern United States that justice rarely falls from the sky. Sometimes you have to build it brick by brick, piece of evidence by piece of evidence, until you have a foundation so solid that no one can ignore it. And now with her son by her side and enough evidence to ruin the reputation of those privileged families, she was about to teach a lesson that none of those boys would ever forget. Each new humiliation they imposed only strengthened something inside her that their oppressors couldn't see. A quiet determination fueled by the very injustice they tried to normalize. What those privileged young men didn't know was that each act of contempt was writing its own sentence, and Dorothy had become the patient scribe of that inevitable condemnation. 22 hours later, James kept his promise. The first stop was the Morrison Farm, a 500-acre property that had dominated the county's rural landscape for 3 generations. Mr. Morrison answered the door, expecting another salesman or agricultural representative, when he saw James Patterson on his porch. Impeccable military uniform, posture commanding, instant respect. His expression changed immediately. Mr. Morrison, I'm James Patterson. We need to talk about your son Tyler and an incident that occurred yesterday at Miller's Diner. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. James didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just presented facts with the precision of a military report, dates, times, witnesses, photographic evidence that Dorothy had discreetly collected over the past 3 weeks. When he finished, Mr. Morrison was pale. My son did that to an elderly woman, to my mother repeatedly for 3 weeks. The next visit was to the Hanson family, then the Wrights, then the Davidsons, finally the Mitchells, a teach house. The same routine, calm introduction, irrefutable evidence, legal consequences explained in detail. While James methodically executed his plan, Dorothy wasn't just waiting at home. She had spent the night organizing something she had been preparing for, longer than anyone realized. On Thesmall dining table, carefully laid out, were 3 years' worth of documentation. Not just 3 weeks, 3 full years, because Tyler, Brad, Connor, Jake, and Ryan hadn't just started tormenting the elderly recently. It was a pattern. Dorothy had discovered this 6 months ago when Mrs. Chun, an 80-year-old Korean woman who attended the same church, casually mentioned that those noisy boys had mocked her accent at the supermarket. That's when Dorothy began to really investigate. Conversations with other seniors in the community revealed a disturbing pattern. The 5 young men had a long history of bullying, specifically targeting older people, people with disabilities, minorities, anyone they perceived as vulnerable. Mom, did you collect all this yourself? James held a folder with more than 50 pages of chronologically organized statements. Son, when you're invisible to people, you can see things they don't realize they're revealing. Dorothy adjusted her glasses, and I had help. That help came in the form of Patricia Williams, a 68-year-old retired lawyer whom Dorothy knew from church. Patricia had lost her husband to dementia 2 years earlier, and had personally witnessed Connor mocking his mental confusion at a pharmacy. Dorothy, with this documentation and the new evidence James has collected, we have a case that goes beyond a simple isolated incident. Patricia leafed through the documents with experienced eyes. This demonstrates a pattern of behavior. We can sue not only the boys, but potentially their parents for negligence in supervising repeated criminal conduct. James watched the 2 women working together, his 72-year-old mother and the retired lawyer, and for the first time in days felt something other than anger. He felt pride. They were not passive victims. They were patient strategists. There's one more thing. Dorothy opened a drawer and took out Asmall digital recorder that James had given her last Christmas, thinking she would never use it. Yesterday, when those boys were surrounding me, I activated the recording. I have every word, every laugh, every threat on the recording, crystal clear, were the voices of the 5 young men, creating a perfect audio record of elder abuse, racial discrimination, and threats. Their jokes, when documented in cold technical audio, lost any veneer of youthful innocence and revealed their true nature, calculated cruelty. Meanwhile, in the homes of the 5 boys, reality was beginning to penetrate their bubbles of privilege for the first time. Tyler had his car confiscated by his father. Brad was grounded. Connor was forced to disconnect from social media. Jake and Ryan faced conversations that began with, "You embarrassed us," and ended with threats of disinheritance. But the real storm was yet to come, the following Thursday, exactly 1 week after the incident. Dorothy returned to Miller's Diner, not in a wheelchair. She could walk short distances with a walker, but she chose the chair on purpose. She wanted them to see exactly who they had tried to humiliate. The reaction was immediate. Conversation ceased, cutlery stopped in midair. All eyes turned to her as James calmly led her to the same table as always. "Good morning, everyone," Dorothy greeted them in a clear voice. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" The uncomfortable silence was broken when the 5 boys entered the diner. Not by choice, their parents had forced them to be there. Part of the promised consequences. They looked like they had aged years in a week. Tyler was the first to approach. "Mrs. Patterson." His voice faltered. "Not yet." Dorothy raised her hand. "First, I want you all to see something." James connected a tablet to the small TV the diner used for football games. On the screen, a professionally edited compilation began to play. Clips from security cameras over the last 3 months, showing the 5 young men tormenting not only Dorothy but at least 6 other different seniors. Each date, each location, each victim clearly identified. The diner watched in absolute silence. When the video ended, several people had tears in their eyes. Not out of pity for Dorothy, but out of anger at the perpetrators. "You're not just kids being kids," Dorothy finally spoke, her voice echoing in the stillness. "You're predators who choose the easiest prey. And I have proof of every moment." Brad began to cry openly. Jake stared at the floor. Ryan was visibly shaking. Connor looked like he was on the verge of collapse. Tyler, the leader, was pale as a sheet. Patricia Williams, sitting at a nearby table, stood up. "Gentlemen, I am Patricia Williams, attorney. I represent not only Mrs. Patterson, but 6 other families you have tormented. We have sufficient documentation for criminal and civil lawsuits that would destroy not only your lives, but potentially those of your parents. The weight of those words fell on the 5 young men like a social death sentence. Their lives, carefully constructed on privilege and impunity, were crumbling in real time before witnesses recorded for posterity. Dorothy watched each of them with an expression that mixed severity with something more complex. Not exactly pity, but recognition that they were, after all, young idiots who'd never faced real consequences until now. But she paused significantly, and for the first time, the 5 looked up with something resembling desperate hope. Perhaps there is a better way. What none of them realized yet was that Dorothy wasn't just out to destroy them. She was out to transform them. Because unlike the boys who judged people by their appearance and physical imitations, Dorothy saw potential even in her worst oppressors. The plan she and Patricia had devised wasn't just about revenge. It was about rebuilding 5 broken lives and in the process, saving future victims that these young men would inevitably encounter if they continued on their current path. But first, they would need to descend to the bottom of the pit they had dug for themselves. Because only when you are completely destroyed can you begin to build something truly better. And rock bottom was closer than any of them realized. The better path, Dorothy repeated, looking each of the 5 boys in the eye, is for you to understand what real consequence means. Patricia opened a second folder. In addition to the criminal proceedings I already mentioned, we've compiled something more interesting. She began distributing copies to each parent present. A complete history of your children's behavior over the past 3 years. 17 different victims, all documented. Mr. Morrison leafed through the pages, his face turning progressively red. Tyler, is this true? Did you do this to Mr. Chin too? Dad, I answer me. James activated the tablet again. But there's more. Last night, I had productive conversations with the school board, the county sheriff, and 3 local journalists interested in stories about systematic elder abuse in our community. Brad began to hyperventilate. Are you going to expose us publicly? No. Dorothy raised her hand. You're going to do that yourselves, Patricia explained coldly. You have 48 hours to record public videos confessing your crimes, apologizing to each victim by name, and committing to 500 hours of community service in nursing homes and senior centers. These videos will be posted on your personal social media accounts. Impossible. That will destroy our reputations. Connor protested. Exactly. James crossed his arms. You destroyed the dignity of 17 people. Now it's your turn to learn how that feels. What if we refuse? Tyler tried to maintain some bravado. Dorothy smiled for the first time. Then Patricia will file all criminal charges tomorrow morning. Article 47 of the Texas Penal Code. The 5 of you will be held criminally liable. Your parents will be held civilly liable. And I will personally ensure that every newspaper, every TV channel, every blog in this region knows exactly who you are. The silence that followed was absolute. The 5 young people looked to their parents for salvation. They found only disappointment and shame. Mr. Hansen was the first to speak. Brad will accept the terms, and he will serve every second of those 500 hours. One by one, the other parents agreed. They had no choice. Dorothy had built such a solid, meticulously documented case that resisting would be social and legal suicide. One last thing, James approached the boys. If any of you at any time in the future are caught intimidating, humiliating or disrespecting any vulnerable person, I will know and there will be no second chance. As the families left the diner in humiliated silence, Dorothy remained seated, watching through the window. There was no triumph in her expression, only the quiet satisfaction of someone who had planted seeds of justice that would grow for generations. What began as the humiliation of an elderly woman had turned into something much greater.